Imagine standing on the shores of an ancient civilization as the skies darken and the ground trembles beneath your feet. The people around you don't have satellites or seismographs. They only have stories. So when the earth splits open or the seas rise without warning, they don't just record what happened. They transform it. They weave it into legends of gods and monsters, heroes and curses, turning raw terror into something meaningful, something they can pass down through generations. What if these myths weren't just flights of fancy, but survival manuals disguised as epic tales? Every culture has its myths, stories of great floods, world-ending fires, and battles between cosmic forces. But what if these weren't just metaphors? What if they were eyewitness accounts, carefully wrapped in symbolism to preserve the memory of real disasters? Think about it. A village wiped out by a tsunami becomes a tale of a vengeful sea god. A volcanic eruption that blackened the sky for months morphs into a dragon's fiery breath. These stories were more than entertainment. They were warnings, lessons, and even coping mechanisms for societies that faced nature's wrath with no way to predict or prevent it. In this video, we're unraveling 23 of these heroic myths to reveal the natural catastrophes hidden beneath their surfaces. From the biblical flood to the sinking of Atlantis, from the Norse apocalypse of Ragnarök to the Maori hero who climbed the heavens to unleash a deluge, each one holds a kernel of truth, a geological or climatic event that shaped human history in ways we're only now beginning to understand. We'll trace the fingerprints of real disasters in these ancient narratives, exploring how floods, earthquakes, and eruptions were personified into gods and monsters. By the end, you'll never look at mythology the same way again. These stories were our ancestors' way of making sense of a world that could turn deadly in an instant, and their wisdom, buried in allegory, still speaks to us today. Imagine a time when the world was younger, when entire civilizations clung to river valleys and coastlines, unaware that the very waters sustaining them could rise up and erase everything in an instant. The story of a great flood isn't just a tale, it's a memory, passed down through generations in nearly every corner of the globe. From the biblical Noah to the Mesopotamian hero Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, from the Hindu Manu to the Maya's Popol Vuh, the details shift, but the core remains eerily the same, an overwhelming deluge sent by the gods to cleanse the earth, sparing only a chosen few. What's fascinating isn't just the recurring theme, it's the precision. These stories often describe torrential rains, rising waters swallowing mountains, and survivors escaping by boat with animals in tow. Could so many cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, have imagined nearly identical catastrophes by chance? Geologists don't think so. Layers of sediment and ancient shorelines tell a story of their own. At the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, melting glaciers triggered massive floods. The Black Sea, once a freshwater lake, may have been inundated by the Mediterranean in a catastrophic deluge. Coastal communities would have witnessed tsunamis, their homes vanishing beneath the waves in a single catastrophic night. But here's the twist: these myths aren't just records of disaster. They're survival guides wrapped in metaphor. The Ark isn't just a boat, it's a lesson in preparedness. The animals represent biodiversity, a reminder to preserve life even in chaos. And the Rainbow Covenant in Noah's story, a promise that nature, no matter how violent, follows cycles. Our ancestors weren't just storytellers, they were scientists in their own right, encoding warnings into myth because they had no other way to ensure their descendants would remember. The next time you hear a flood myth, listen closely. beneath the thunder of divine anger, you might just hear the echoes of real waves crashing against real shores, a message from the past saying, "This happened once. It could happen again." Plato's account of Atlantis reads like a blueprint for disaster, a thriving island nation, rich with advanced technology and towering architecture, vanishing beneath the waves in a single day and night of cataclysm. For centuries, scholars dismissed it as pure fiction, a philosopher's allegory about hubris. But what if the story wasn't invented? What if it was a distorted memory of something far more terrifying? The clues lie in the Aegean Sea, where the volcanic island of Thera, modern Santorini, exploded around 1600 BC with a force estimated to be 4 times stronger than Krakatoa. The eruption didn't just bury cities under ash, it unleashed tsunamis that radiated across the Mediterranean, reaching heights of 40 feet or more. Coastal settlements would have been erased without warning, their stories cut short in an instant. Among the hardest hit, the Minoans, a sophisticated civilization on Crete, just 70 miles south of Thera. Their palaces, with labyrinthine corridors and vibrant frescoes, show signs of sudden collapse, walls toppled, artifacts left mid-use as if life stopped mid-breath. Now compare that to Plato's Atlantis. He describes a circular city, concentric rings of land and water, a dead ringer for Thera's volcanic caldera before it collapsed into the sea. The timeline fits too. Plato claims Atlantis fell 9,000 years before his time, but some historians argue it was a mistranslation. 900 years would place it squarely in the Minoan era. Even the name might hold a clue. Atlantis could derive from Atlas, the titan who held up the heavens, but also the name of the mountain at Thera's center before it blew apart. But here's where myth and geology intertwine most eerily. Plato wrote of Atlantis' demise as divine punishment for corruption. The Minoans, meanwhile, left behind artwork of bulls and double axes, symbols later Greeks associated with tyranny and excess. Could the story of Atlantis be a moralized retelling of Thera's eruption, where nature itself judged a civilization? The ash layers and tsunami deposits tell us one truth, the myth another. Together, they form a warning. No empire, no matter how grand, is immune to the Earth's fury. The real power of Atlantis isn't just as a lost city, but as a metaphor. Every culture has its version, a golden age swallowed by the sea, a reminder of fragility. The Minoans didn't vanish completely. Their art, their architecture, even their plumbing systems influenced the Greeks who came after. In that sense, Atlantis never truly sank. It just transformed like lava cooling into new land. The disaster became a story, the story became a legend, and the legend. Well, it's still teaching us to respect the forces that shape our world. The Vikings didn't just fear the end of the world, they painted it in vivid, terrifying detail. Ragnarök, the Norse apocalypse, wasn't some distant metaphor. It was a prophecy woven from the very landscape they lived in, a land of fire and ice where the ground itself could split open without warning. Picture this, the sun swallowed by a monstrous wolf, the sky stained with ash, rivers boiling as the earth trembles under the footsteps of giants. These weren't just poetic flourishes. They were observations. Iceland, home to some of the most active volcanoes on Earth, provided a front-row seat to the kind of chaos that could easily be mistaken for the end of days. Take the description of Surtur, the fire giant who engulfs the world in flames. His name literally means black or swarthy, a perfect match for the charred landscapes left behind by lava flows. And when the myths speak of the sun turning black, think of the volcanic ash clouds that have, in real life, plunged parts of Iceland into darkness for months. Even the boiling rivers have a basis in reality. Geothermal activity in Iceland creates scalding hot springs and rivers that steam and bubble as if the earth itself is alive with fury. But here's what's truly fascinating. Ragnarök isn't just about destruction, it's about rebirth. After the fires die down and the seas calm, the myths tell of a new world rising from the ashes, lush and green. This mirrors the way volcanic soil, rich in minerals, eventually becomes some of the most fertile land on Earth. The Norse weren't just documenting disaster, they were capturing the cyclical nature of their environment. A volcano might bury a village today, but in a few generations that same land would feed an entire community. So why wrap these observations in myth? Because stories stick. A farmer might not remember a geology lecture, but he'd never forget the tale of the fire giant whose wrath could level mountains. By turning volcanic eruptions into cosmic battles, the Vikings gave their people a way to understand and respect the raw power of the world around them. Ragnarök wasn't just a warning, it was a reminder nature doesn't care about gods or men. It simply is. And in the face of that truth, all we can do is listen to the stories of those who came before us, because sometimes the oldest tales hold the sharpest lessons. Hercules wasn't just a muscle-bound hero, he was ancient Greece's answer to a survival manual. His famous 12 labors read like a checklist of environmental disasters, each one a metaphor for humanity's struggle to wrest order from nature's chaos. Take the Augean stables piled high with decades of filth. On the surface, it's a story about a demigod shoveling manure, but dig deeper, and it starts to look like a parable for flood control. The stable's endless waste mirrors the silt left behind when rivers overflow their banks, choking farmland and settlements. Hercules doesn't just clean, he reroutes entire rivers to scour the filth away. That's not just brute strength, it's hydraulic engineering disguised as myth. Now consider his other labors. The Nemean lion, with its impenetrable hide, could symbolize the relentless droughts that turned the Greek landscape into a barren furnace. No weapon could pierce the lion's skin, just as no plow could break the sun-baked earth. Hercules solves the problem by strangling it with his bare hands, a stark lesson in adapting when traditional tools fail. Then there's the Lernaean Hydra, the many-headed serpent that grows 2 new heads for every one cut off. Sounds familiar? It's practically a carbon copy of invasive species or pest outbreaks, where solving one problem only creates others. Hercules doesn't just fight the Hydra, he cauterizes each stump to prevent regrowth, an ancient nod to the need for systemic solutions rather than quick fixes. Even the lesser-known labors fit this pattern. The Cyrenian hind, a sacred deer with golden antlers, might represent overhunting's consequences. The Erymanthian boar, rampaging through villages, echoes the destruction of flash floods or landslides. Each labor reframes a natural threat as a monster to be conquered, turning ecological anxiety into something tangible and beatable. What's remarkable isn't just the symbolism, but the specificity. These myths don't just say nature is dangerous, they catalog exactly how it's dangerous, offering tailored responses. Hercules doesn't rely on strength alone. He outthinks each challenge, whether by diverting rivers or trapping beasts alive. That's the real lesson here. Survival isn't about dominating nature, but decoding it. The Greeks didn't have environmental science textbooks. They had stories that taught them to read the land like a map, to anticipate disasters before they struck. Hercules wasn't just a hero, he was a blueprint for resilience written in the language of myth. So the next time you hear about his labors, don't just picture a man wrestling lions. Picture an entire civilization wrestling with the elements, turning their fears into folklore, and their folklore into a survival strategy. Because when the river rises or the crops fail, it's not just Hercules who needs to be clever. It's all of us. The legend of the Minotaur's labyrinth isn't just a tale of a monster lurking in the shadows, it's a haunting echo of real-world chaos. Picture the palace of Knossos, the heart of Minoan civilization, its grand corridors and vibrant frescoes suddenly reduced to rubble by an earthquake's indiscriminate force. Survivors would have stumbled through a nightmare of collapsed walls and blocked passageways, every turn a dead end, every room a potential tomb. Now, imagine retelling that trauma centuries later. The labyrinth isn't just a maze, it's the twisted wreckage of a once great city, its confusion and terror crystallized into myth. Archaeologists have unearthed evidence of multiple quakes that rocked Knossos, some so severe they triggered fires or caused entire wings of the palace to buckle. The Minoans, master builders of multi-story complexes with intricate drainage systems, were no strangers to nature's fury. But how do you explain such destruction to future generations? You personify it. The Minotaur, half-man, half-bull, becomes the embodiment of that uncontrollable violence, a force that demands sacrifice, just as earthquakes demand lives. And Theseus, the hero who navigates the labyrinth to slay the beast, represents the resilience of those who dared to rebuild. Here's where the allegory deepens. The myth describes Theseus unraveling a golden thread to mark his path, a detail that might seem fanciful until you consider how quake survivors actually navigate. In the aftermath of disaster, people use whatever they can to trace safe routes through debris, ropes, cloth, even shattered pottery arranged as markers. The thread isn't just a plot device, it's a survival tactic repackaged as symbolism. But the labyrinth's symbolism doesn't end with physical destruction. It also mirrors the psychological maze of trauma. Earthquakes don't just topple buildings, they shatter certainty. One moment the ground is solid, the next it's betraying you. The Minotaur's labyrinth, with its endless twists and unseen horrors, captures that vertigo of trust lost and Theseus' victory. It's not just about killing a monster. It's about reclaiming order from chaos, proving that even the most convoluted nightmares have an exit. The Minoans may be gone, but their stories linger, whispering a truth we still grapple with today. Disasters don't just reshape landscapes. They reshape minds, and sometimes the only way to make sense of the unimaginable is to turn it into a legend, one where the hero, armed with nothing but courage and a thread, finds his way home. There's something almost magical about watching a forest regrow after a wildfire, charred trunks giving way to green shoots, life stubbornly pushing through the ashes. No creature captures this phenomenon better than the phoenix, the legendary bird that rises anew from its own destruction. But this isn't just a pretty metaphor. The phoenix myth appears in cultures from ancient Egypt to China, often in regions where fire was a regular, terrifying force. The Egyptians called it the Bennu, a heron-like bird linked to the sun god Ra and the Nile's annual floods, which left fertile silt in their wake. The Chinese Feng Huang, though not always fiery, symbolized harmony emerging from chaos, much like landscapes rebounding after disaster. What's striking is how these myths mirror real ecological cycles. Take Australia's eucalyptus forests, where some trees need fire to reproduce. Their seeds only germinate after being scorched. Indigenous stories from the continent speak of firebirds or rainbow serpents that cleanse the land, ensuring renewal. Similarly, the volcanic plains of Iceland, where lava fields eventually transform into some of the richest grazing land, echo the phoenix's promise. From devastation comes fertility. These aren't coincidences, they're observations encoded in story form, a way to explain why destruction doesn't always mean the end. But the phoenix isn't just about nature's resilience, it's about human psychology. After a catastrophe, whether wildfire or war, people cling to symbols of hope. The phoenix, with its cyclical rebirth, offered assurance that loss wasn't permanent. In ancient Rome, the bird even appeared on coins after periods of civil unrest, a political emblem of the empire's ability to reinvent itself. Today, we see the same idea in phrases like rising from the ashes, used for everything from business recoveries to personal comebacks. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in the phoenix's silence. Unlike gods who thunder or monsters who roar, the phoenix doesn't speak. It simply burns and rises again and again. In that quiet persistence, our ancestors saw a truth we still grapple with. Disaster isn't an anomaly, it's part of the rhythm. The phoenix doesn't promise safety, it promises continuity. And sometimes that's enough. Japan's Yamata no Orochi wasn't just a monster, it was a force of nature given teeth and scales. Picture an 8-headed serpent, each mouth dripping poison, its massive body stretching across mountains and valleys like a river in flood. When the storm god Tsunami confronts this beast, he doesn't just fight it, he outsmarts it, luring it with sake until the serpent collapses in a drunken stupor. On the surface, it's a classic hero versus monster tale, but look closer, and the myth reveals itself as a brilliant allegory for taming Japan's most relentless natural foe, water. The clues are woven into the landscape itself. The high river near where the legend is set has a long history of catastrophic flooding, its tributaries branching like the serpent's many heads. Each head could symbolize a separate channel or flash flood, overwhelming villages with the same terrifying efficiency as a mythical beast devouring sacrifices. Tsunami's victory, cutting off each head one by one, mirrors the painstaking process of building embankments and redirecting waterways to control the river's destructive power. Even the sake used to intoxicate the serpent holds meaning. In ancient Japan, alcohol was often offered to deities during rituals to appease them. By using sake to weaken Orochi, the myth might be encoding an early understanding of flood mitigation. Sometimes you don't fight nature head-on. You negotiate with it, but the story doesn't end with the serpent's death. From Orochi's tale, Tsunami pulls the sacred sword Kusanagi, a symbol of unexpected bounty emerging from disaster. This echoes a very real phenomenon in floodplains, where receding waters leave behind nutrient-rich silt, revitalizing the soil. The myth acknowledges a hard truth: the same force that destroys can also provide. It's a lesson etched into Japan's cultural memory, where tsunamis and typhoons are met not just with fear, but with rituals and shrines that honor the duality of water's power. What makes Yamata no Orochi so enduring isn't just its drama, but its practicality. The tale doesn't just personify a river, it offers a blueprint for survival. Tsunami doesn't rely on brute strength alone, he observes, adapts, and turns the serpent's own gluttony against it. In a land where rivers could erase entire villages in a night, that lesson was priceless. The myth became a way to pass down hard-won wisdom. Respect the water's hunger, but never stop looking for the sword in its tail. Today, modern engineers still grapple with the high river's tantrums, using concrete and satellites where once there were only prayers and legends. Yet the essence remains the same. Every dam, every levee is a continuation of Tsunami's fight, a reminder that humanity's oldest stories aren't just about monsters. They're about the ingenuity it takes to live beside them. The Hindu myth of the churning of the ocean isn't just a fantastical battle between gods and demons, it's a seismic drama written in metaphor. Picture this: the serpent Vasuki coiled around Mount Mandara like a rope, his body pulled taut by deities on one side and demons on the other, the mountain rotating like a cosmic drill bit to stir the depths of the primordial sea. What emerges isn't just the nectar of immortality, but a cascade of treasures and terrors, jewels, a wish-fulfilling cow, the moon, and then, finally, a lethal poison potent enough to threaten all creation. At first glance, it reads like divine whimsy, but peel back the layers and you'll find a stunning allegory for the Earth's most violent upheavals. Consider the mechanics. The back-and-forth tug of war mirrors the grinding of tectonic plates, the mountain's rotation evoking the way land masses twist under pressure, the ocean being churned. That could easily represent the molten mantle beneath the crust, its currents shaping continents like invisible hands kneading dough. When the myth describes the mountain sinking into the abyss, only to be rescued by the tortoise avatar of Vishnu, it's hard not to think of volcanic islands rising and falling with the Earth's restless shifts, or tsunamis retreating after swallowing coastlines whole. But the real genius lies in what the churning produces. The treasures like the goddess Lakshmi rising from the waves on a lotus symbolize the fertile soils and mineral riches birthed by volcanic eruptions or river floods. The poison, though, that's the dark side of disaster, toxic gases, lava flows, or saltwater ruining farmland. Even the solution fits. Shiva swallows the poison to save the world, his throat turning blue from the strain. It's a haunting parallel to how cultures absorb trauma, transforming catastrophe into something survivable, if not beautiful. What makes this myth so enduring isn't just its spectacle, but its honesty. It doesn't pretend destruction has no cost. The ocean gives both life and death, just as a single earthquake can level cities yet expose untapped aquifers. The gods and demons, despite their rivalry, must cooperate to churn a reminder that nature's chaos cares nothing for mortal divisions. In the end, the nectar is earned, not granted. Perhaps that's the deepest lesson. Renewal isn't a gift. It's something you wrest from the jaws of disaster, one back-breaking pull at a time. Homer's Odyssey paints a nightmare scenario for any ancient mariner, a narrow strait where death lurks on both sides. To one side, the six-headed monster Scylla, snatching sailors from their decks with serpentine necks. To the other, Charybdis, a gaping whirlpool capable of swallowing entire ships whole. Odysseus, forced to choose between these twin horrors, loses 6 men to Scylla's jaws while barely escaping Charybdis' vortex. It's a harrowing passage, but beneath the mythic terror lies something far more tangible: the real-world dangers of Mediterranean seafaring. The Strait of Messina between Sicily and mainland Italy fits Homer's description with eerie precision. Here, tidal currents collide with underwater topography, creating violent whirlpools that still challenge modern ships. Ancient sailors wouldn't have understood the science behind these phenomena, the way water funnels through narrow channels, or how submerged faults might trigger sudden turbulence. Instead, they personified the chaos. Charybdis, with her cyclical swallowing and spewing of water, mirrors the whirlpool's predictable yet deadly rhythm. Scylla's multiple heads, those could represent the jagged rocks lining the strait's cliffs, their outcrops appearing to strike like serpents as waves dash vessels against them. But the genius of this myth isn't just in its metaphors, it's in its psychological realism. Odysseus isn't given a heroic solution. He's forced to make an impossible choice, sacrifice a few to save the many. That's not poetic license, it's navigational reality. Ancient captains often had to weigh risks like sailing closer to rocky shoals versus unpredictable currents. The story encodes a brutal truth. Sometimes survival means accepting loss. Even the description of Scylla's lair, high in a cavern's gloom, matches the topography of the strait's cliffs, where shadows and echoes could amplify a sailor's terror. What makes Scylla and Charybdis endure isn't just their drama, but their duality. Unlike other monsters, they aren't evil, they're indifferent. Charybdis doesn't hunt, she simply is, a force as natural as the tide. That's why this myth resonates beyond ancient Greece. Every culture has its version of a devil's choice in the face of nature's whims. Modern hikers choosing between avalanche-prone slopes and crevasse-riddled glaciers face the same calculus Odysseus did. The myth doesn't offer a way out. It offers a way through, a reminder that some dangers can't be vanquished, only navigated with eyes wide open. Homer's audience might have shuddered at Scylla's snarl or Charybdis' roar. But somewhere in those shudders was recognition. They knew these weren't just monsters, they were the sea itself, whispering a warning no sailor could afford to ignore. The Nile turning to blood, swarms of locusts blackening the sky, livestock dropping dead without warning. The biblical plagues of Egypt read like an apocalyptic checklist, but strip away the divine wrath, and you're left with something startlingly familiar, an ecological collapse in slow motion. What if these weren't supernatural punishments, but a chain reaction of environmental disasters, each one triggering the next? Modern science offers some compelling clues. That first plague, the river's waters transforming into blood, it could point to a toxic algal bloom where certain microorganisms multiply explosively, staining the water crimson and suffocating fish. Such blooms often follow extreme weather, say, prolonged drought or unseasonal rains, both of which appear in the biblical timeline. Then comes the plague of frogs. On the surface, it seems fantastical, but consider this. When algae die off, oxygen levels in the water plummet, forcing amphibians to flee en masse onto land. And what happens when those frogs inevitably perish in the harsh desert sun? Rotting carcasses become breeding grounds for the next plagues, lice and flies. These aren't arbitrary curses, they're cause and effect written in the language of ecology. Even the livestock deaths fit. Anthrax, a bacterial disease thriving in damp soil after floods, could explain the sudden loss of cattle, a catastrophe for an agrarian society. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. Some researchers trace this domino effect to a single catalyst, the eruption of Thera, the volcanic cataclysm that may have inspired Atlantis' downfall. Ash fallout drifting over Egypt could have acidified the Nile, triggering algal blooms. Climate disruptions from the eruption might have shifted wind patterns, bringing locust swarms or unseasonal hailstorms, another plague described as fire mingled with ice. The darkness that blanketed Egypt for days, that's textbook volcanic winter where ash clouds blot out the sun. What's remarkable isn't just the scientific plausibility, but how the myth reframes these events. To the ancient Egyptians, the Nile wasn't just a river, it was the lifeblood of their civilization, governed by the god Hapi. When it turned to blood, it wasn't merely polluted, it was a divine affront. The plague's progression mirrors a society grappling with incomprehensible upheaval, attributing each new disaster to escalating divine anger. In reality, they were witnessing nature's interconnectedness, where one imbalance spirals into systemic failure. This myth endures because it speaks to a fear we still harbor today, that our environment, once taken for granted, can turn against us with terrifying speed. The plagues warn of thresholds, moments when the land, the water, or the air crosses a line from which there's no easy return. For the Egyptians, the lesson was theological. For us, it's ecological. The real power of the story isn't in its wrath, but in its uncanny foresight. Disrupt the balance, and the consequences won't come singly. They'll come in waves, each one more desperate than the last. So when you hear of locust swarms devastating modern crops or rivers choked with algae, remember the plagues were never just a myth. They were a mirror held up to show us how fragile our pact with nature really is. And sometimes the oldest stories make for the sharpest warnings. High above the Pacific Ocean, where the sky meets the sea in a shimmering horizon, the Maori hero Tāwhaki begins his impossible climb, a journey to the heavens to avenge his father's death. But this isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a story written in water. With every step Tāwhaki takes up the vine ropes of the sky, the clouds darken, the winds howl, and the rains begin to fall. By the time he reaches the 10th heaven, the deluge is unstoppable, swallowing islands whole. On the surface, it's a myth about a sun's rage, but listen to the rhythm of the waves beneath the words, and you'll hear something else, the echo of real Pacific tsunamis, their towering walls of water crashing against ancestral shores. The Maori, master navigators of the ocean's vast expanse, knew the sea's dual nature. It could nourish with one hand and obliterate with the other. When Tāwhaki's climb triggers the flood, the myth mirrors the suddenness of a cyclone or tsunami, where calm skies give way to chaos in moments. The vine he climbs might symbolize the towering waterspouts of a tropical storm, or even the sacred connection between earth and sky, severed by human ambition. And his ascent to the heavens, that could represent the desperate prayers of islanders watching the horizon darken, bargaining with the gods to spare their homes. But here's the twist: Tāwhaki isn't punished for his actions, he's transformed. After the flood, he gains divine knowledge, becoming a bridge between the spiritual and physical worlds. This mirrors the resilience of Pacific communities, where disasters aren't just tragedies, they're teachers. After a tsunami recedes, survivors rebuild with deeper understanding, weaving new stories into their oral histories to warn future generations. The flood isn't just destruction, it's a reset, a chance to grow wiser. The genius of this myth lies in its layers. Tāwhaki's flood isn't a random act of gods. It's a consequence. His father's death, caused by jealousy and betrayal, sets the cycle in motion. In Maori cosmology, nature isn't separate from human morality. Disrupt the balance and the earth itself responds. This idea resonates across Polynesia, where storms are often seen as the fury of disrespected ancestors or neglected gods. The myth isn't just explaining disasters, it's prescribing a way to live with them, honor the past, or face the waves. Today, scientists study sediment cores from Pacific islands, finding evidence of ancient mega-tsunamis that match the timing of oral traditions like Tāwhaki's. The stories weren't exaggerations, they were records etched into memory because paper and stone could wash away. When modern geologists listen to these myths, they're not just hearing legends. They're reading a survival manual written in the language of allegory. So the next time you hear of Tāwhaki's climb, don't just picture a hero scaling the heavens. Picture 1,000 years of watched horizons, of elders pointing to the sea and saying, "Remember, the flood is coming. The only question is whether we'll be ready when it does." Balor of the Evil Eye wasn't just a monster, he was a walking catastrophe. In Celtic myth, this one-eyed giant could level entire armies with a single glance, his lidless eye radiating death like a beacon of doom. But what if that gaze wasn't metaphorical? What if it was the very real, suffocating menace of volcanic gases seeping from Ireland's restless earth? The clues lie in the landscape. Ireland's County Sligo, where Balor's legend is deeply rooted, is dotted with dormant volcanic features, including crater lakes whose still waters can hide lethal secrets. These lakes occasionally release pockets of carbon dioxide or methane, invisible killers that creep along the ground, choking everything in their path, an eerily precise match for Balor's indiscriminate, site-based slaughter. Now consider how Balor meets his end. The young sun god Lugh doesn't confront him head-on. Instead, he hurls a spear, or in some versions, a sling stone directly into Balor's eye, obliterating it in a single strike. This isn't just a heroic flourish, It's a poetic rendering of natural salvation. In volcanic regions, toxic gases often dissipate when strong winds sweep through, dispersing the deadly haze. Lugh, associated with light and sky, embodies that cleansing breeze. His victory isn't just over a monster, it's nature's self-correction, where atmospheric forces neutralize the Earth's poisons. But the myth goes deeper than geology. Balor's story is wrapped in layers of taboo and irony. He's doomed by a prophecy that his own grandson will kill him, so he imprisons his daughter to prevent her from bearing children, only for her to secretly give birth to Lugh. This twist mirrors humanity's fraught relationship with disaster. The harder we try to control nature, the more unpredictably it retaliates. The evil eye, a symbol of cursed foresight, becomes a warning about the limits of human power. You can't wall off danger forever. Eventually, the wind will change, the earth will stir, and the very measures meant to protect you might become your undoing. What makes Balor's tale timeless isn't just its scientific resonance, but its emotional weight. The Celtic world was one of misty glens and sudden storms, where the line between the mystical and the meteorological was thin. By personifying lethal gases as a towering fiend, the myth gave people a way to conceptualize an invisible threat and a hero to root for in its defeat. Lugh's triumph wasn't just about slaying a giant. It was about believing that even the most suffocating darkness could be pierced by light. Today, modern monitors track gas levels around volcanic lakes, and warning signs stand where Balor's gaze might have fallen. But the old stories still linger, whispering a truth we've yet to outgrow. Some dangers don't roar. They simply rise, silent and patient, waiting for the wind to decide their path. And in that silence, we still need our lughs, not just to save us, but to remind us that even the deadliest forces are part of the world's balance, not its curse. The Aztecs didn't just believe the world would end, they knew it already had. 4 times over, their cosmology tells of 4 previous suns, each representing an era of humanity annihilated by a different catastrophe, crushed by jaguars, swept away by hurricanes, consumed by fire, drowned in floods. These weren't just random disasters, they were chapters in a cyclical saga, a celestial clockwork where destruction wasn't the end but a reset. The 5th sun, the one we live under now, was no exception. It too was destined to fall, this time by earthquakes. What's chilling isn't the prophecy itself, but how closely it mirrors the geological and climatic upheavals that shaped ancient Mesoamerica. Take the first sun, destroyed by jaguars. On the surface, it sounds mythical, a world where giant cats rule. But consider this, during the last ice age, saber-toothed cats and other megafauna roamed the Americas. As glaciers retreated and climates shifted, these predators may have grown desperate, attacking human settlements in waves. The Aztecs, inheriting oral traditions thousands of years old, could have preserved a fragmented memory of this ecological collapse, reframing it as divine judgment. The second sun, toppled by hurricanes, aligns with evidence of ancient mega-storms along the Gulf Coast, where sediment layers show cycles of violent wind and rain. The third sun's fiery demise, that could echo volcanic eruptions like Xitl's, which buried Cuicuilco under lava around 2,000 years ago, a disaster witnessed by ancestors of the Aztecs. But it's the 4th sun's flood that's most revealing. Aztec texts describe 40 days of rain, a deluge so complete it turned humans into fish, a striking parallel to flood myths worldwide. Geologists have found evidence of catastrophic flooding in the basin of Mexico, where sudden rises in lake levels would have submerged entire communities. The Aztecs built their capital, Tenochtitlan, on an island in this very basin, surrounded by water they both revered and feared. Their myth wasn't just storytelling. It was a way of encoding survival lessons. Don't build too low, don't ignore the signs, remember how the last world fell. What sets the Aztec narrative apart is its brutal optimism. Unlike linear apocalypses where the end is final, their cosmology insists on regeneration. Each destroyed sun gives way to a new one, just as agricultural cycles follow famine, or volcanic ash fertilizes new growth. Even the fifth sun's predicted demise by earthquake carries a strange hope. The Aztecs believed this collapse would birth a sixth era, perhaps wiser than the last. Their myths weren't about helplessness, they were about preparation, a reminder that cataclysms aren't failures of the world but part of its rhythm. Today, scientists study ice cores and sediment layers, uncovering proof of ancient droughts and eruptions that reshaped civilizations. The Aztecs, without satellites or seismographs, did the same using stories as their data, heroes as their hypotheses. Their 5 suns aren't just myths, they're a ledger painstakingly kept across generations, recording the price of survival in a world where the ground can shake, the sky can burn, and the waters always eventually rise. The lesson isn't that the end is coming, it's that it's come before, and if we're listening, the past might just teach us how to weather the next one. Beneath the simmering slopes of Mount Etna, the ancient Greeks believed a monster lay trapped, not just any monster, but Typhon, the most terrifying creature their myths could conjure. Described as a towering giant with 100 serpent heads, each spewing venom and flame, Typhon wasn't merely a villain in their stories. He was the living embodiment of the mountain's fury. When the earth shook or lava spilled down the slopes, it wasn't just geology at work. It was Typhon stirring in his subterranean prison, his restless movements cracking the ground, his fiery breath melting rock into rivers of destruction. The parallels between myth and reality are impossible to ignore. Mount Etna, Europe's most active volcano, has erupted countless times over the centuries, its explosions lighting up the Sicilian sky like a beacon of chaos. To the Greeks, these eruptions weren't random events, they were the struggles of a defeated titan. According to legend, Typhon was buried under the mountain after a cataclysmic battle with Zeus, the king of the gods. Every rumble, every tremor was a reminder that the giant wasn't dead, just imprisoned, his wrath simmering beneath the surface. But Typhon's myth isn't just a poetic way to explain volcanic activity. It's a masterclass in how cultures process trauma. Imagine living in the shadow of Etna, watching your fields vanish under ash, your homes tremble with each new quake. Without the science to understand plate tectonics or magma chambers, the Greeks personified their fear. Typhon's serpentine heads, those could represent the twisting paths of lava flows, unpredictable and venomous in their destruction. His deafening screams, the thunderous booms of pyroclastic explosions, echoing across the valleys. Even his imprisonment under the mountain mirrors the way volcanic pressure builds until it can no longer be contained. What's fascinating is how the myth doesn't end with Typhon's defeat. He's never truly vanquished, just contained, a perpetual threat lurking beneath the earth. This reflects a profound understanding of volcanoes. They're not one-time disasters, but recurring forces of nature. The Greeks knew Etna wouldn't stay quiet forever, just as they knew Typhon would never stop straining against his chains. The myth served as both warning and comfort, a reminder to respect the mountain's power, but also a way to make its violence feel intentional, something that could be understood if not controlled. And then there's the irony. Typhon, for all his terror, was also a creative force. His clashes with Zeus were said to shape the land, carving new valleys and peaks. This mirrors the dual nature of volcanoes. They destroy, but they also create. The fertile soil of Sicily, rich enough to sustain vineyards and orchards, owes its bounty to Etna's past eruptions. The Greeks might not have known about mineral-rich volcanic ash, but their myths captured the truth anyway. Catastrophe and renewal are two sides of the same coin. Today, scientists monitor Etna's every tremor with satellites and seismographs, but the old stories still resonate. When the mountain rumbles, it's hard not to think of Typhon, restless beneath his rocky bonds. The myth endures because it speaks to something primal, the awe of standing before a force that could erase you in an instant, and the stubborn human need to give that force a name, a face, a story. Because if the Earth's fury has a shape, maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to live alongside it. In the frozen expanse of the Arctic, where ice and ocean wage an endless battle, survival hinges on a delicate pact with the sea. The Inuit goddess Sedna isn't just a deity, she's the ultimate gatekeeper of life and death. With her tangled hair flowing like kelp and her hands twisted into the claws of a sea creature, she rules the depths, commanding the seals, whales, and fish that sustain human life. But when disrespected, Sedna's wrath is swift and merciless. She withdraws the ocean's bounty, leaving hunters to starve on the ice. This isn't just a morality tale. It's a chillingly accurate allegory for the Arctic's fragile balance, where even slight shifts in climate could mean the difference between feast and famine. Picture a hunting party returning empty-handed after days on the ice, their families waiting with hollow stomachs. Without modern science to explain shifting migration patterns or sudden storms, the Inuit saw these disasters as Sedna's punishment, perhaps for broken taboos or wasted resources. The myth provided a framework for understanding scarcity. The problem wasn't random chance but human action. This belief wasn't passive, it demanded accountability. Shamans would perform rituals to comb Sedna's hair, symbolically soothing her anger and restoring harmony. In a land where survival depended on respecting limits, the myth reinforced a crucial lesson: take only what you need or face the consequences. But Sedna's story goes deeper than environmental ethics. Her origin myth is a tragedy wrapped in ice. In most versions, she's betrayed by her father, who throws her overboard during a storm to save himself. As she clings to the boat, he hacks off her fingers, which sink and transform into sea creatures. This brutal tale mirrors the Arctic's duality. The same waters that provide can also punish, just as Sedna is both victim and avenger. The severed fingers aren't just body horror, they're a metaphor for adaptation. Even in loss, life persists. The creatures born from her pain become the very food that sustains her people. Today, as Arctic ice retreats and ecosystems destabilize, Sedna's myth feels eerily prescient. Scientists document how warming waters disrupt fish stocks and seal populations, threatening Inuit food security. The goddess's withheld gifts aren't just folklore, they're a foreshadowing of climate change's ripple effects. Yet the myth also carries resilience. Sedna isn't capricious, she's responsive. Calm your noise, the stories whisper, and she might calm the seas. In an era of melting permafrost and uncertain futures, that ancient dialogue between humans and the natural world feels more vital than ever. Sedna's legacy isn't just about fear, it's about reciprocity. The Inuit didn't see themselves as conquerors of nature, but as participants in a conversation older than memory. When the sea grows quiet and the hunt fails, the problem isn't just ecological, it's relational, and sometimes the oldest stories hold the sharpest truths. You can't negotiate with the ice, but you can listen to it. In the swirling chaos of primordial China, the heavens themselves were breaking apart. The goddess Nüwa looked up to see the sky cracking like eggshell, great chunks of the firmament collapsing inward as floods surged from beneath the earth. But this wasn't just divine drama, it was disaster written in celestial ink. According to legend, Nüwa gathered stones of 5 sacred colors: blue, red, yellow, white, and black, melting them together to patch the ruptured sky. She severed the legs of a giant turtle to prop up the 4 corners of the world, stopping its dangerous tilt. On the surface, it's a creation myth, but peel back the layers and you'll find something astonishing. What if Nüwa's sky mending was humanity's first attempt to explain a cataclysmic meteor impact? Consider the details. The collapsing sky perfectly mirrors the terrifying spectacle of a meteor shower, burning debris streaking through the atmosphere like falling celestial shards. The 5 colored stones Nüwa uses could represent different mineral deposits ejected during impact, their hues reflecting the varied composition of space rocks. Even the turtle's legs have scientific resonance. The myth describes the world tilting off balance, which aligns with how massive meteor strikes can temporarily alter Earth's axial rotation. Researchers have found evidence of an ancient impact crater in Zhejiang, Liaoning province, dating back roughly 5,000 years, right when Nüwa's story first emerged in oral traditions. Coincidence or cultural memory preserved in allegory, but Nüwa's repairs aren't just about physical damage, they're about restoring harmony. In Chinese cosmology, the sky wasn't just an expanse, it was a delicate membrane separating order from chaos. When Nüwa reseals it, she doesn't just stop the floods, she re-establishes the rhythm of seasons, the predictability of dawn and dusk. This suggests an even deeper layer to the myth. Could the broken sky also represent a period of prolonged atmospheric darkness, perhaps caused by impact debris or volcanic ash blocking the sun? Agricultural societies would have witnessed crops failing, temperatures plummeting, and familiar weather patterns vanishing overnight. Nüwa's intervention, then, becomes a metaphor for the slow return of stability, the gradual clearing of the skies that survivors would have clung to as hope. What makes this myth so powerful is its duality. Nüwa isn't just a fixer, she's an innovator. The colored stones she uses aren't random. They correspond to the Chinese Wu Xing, or 5-element system, linking her repairs to the fundamental building blocks of nature. This isn't a simple patch job. It's cosmic alchemy, showing how disaster can forge new understanding. Modern astronomers do something similar today, analyzing meteorite composition to unravel the solar system's history. The difference: Nüwa did it with mythology instead of mass spectrometers. The genius of Nüwa's story lies in its endurance. Long after the real event faded from memory, the lesson remained: the world is fragile but not irreparable. When the next disaster strikes, whether quake or storm or fire, we're not just victims, we're menders, gathering whatever stones we can find to piece the sky back together. And sometimes the most ancient stories turn out to be the most forward-looking survival guides of all. High above the Mesopotamian plains, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carved life into the dusty earth, a monstrous shadow darkened the sky: the Zu bird, a divine thief with talons like scimitars and wings that blotted out the sun. In Sumerian myth, this creature wasn't just a predator, it was an agent of chaos, snatching the sacred tablet of destinies from the god Enlil and plunging the world into disarray. But beneath the feathers and fury, this story might hide a far more terrestrial terror: the brutal sandstorms and tempests that could erase an entire harvest in hours, leaving civilizations as fragile as clay tablets in the wind. The Tablet of Destinies wasn't just a religious artifact, it was the cosmic ledger, the divine blueprint that kept seasons regular, rivers flowing, and kings in power. When the Zu bird stole it, the myth describes crops withering, rivers running backward, and the gods themselves stumbling in confusion. Strip away the symbolism, and you're left with a vivid portrait of ecological collapse. Mesopotamia's lifeblood was its rivers, but its curse was the Shamel, the fierce northwesterly wind that could whip up sandstorms so thick they choked the air for days. These storms didn't just blur vision, they buried irrigation canals, poisoned fields with salt, and left temples trembling under the weight of airborne grit. The zoo bird's theft, then, becomes a poetic rendering of nature's indifference. A single storm could steal a season's order as easily as a deity snatching a tablet. Yet the myth doesn't end with despair. The hero god Minotaur, armed with a bow crafted by the heavens, hunts the zoo bird through the raging winds, finally reclaiming the tablet and restoring balance. This victory isn't just about divine justice, it's a metaphor for human ingenuity. The Sumerians were master hydrologists, engineering canals and levees to withstand the capricious rivers. When sandstorms struck, they rebuilt. When floods came, they adapted. Minotaur's triumph mirrors their resilience, turning the myth into a survival mantra. Chaos will come, but it doesn't have to win. What's haunting is how the zoo bird's legacy lingers in modern Mesopotamia. Today, Iraq's marshlands, once the lush heartland of Sumer, faced dust storms so severe they shut down cities, a grim echo of the ancient threat. The Tablet of Destinies might be a myth, but the lesson endures. When the winds rise and the skies darken, the difference between ruin and recovery isn't just luck. It's the determination to chase the storm, bow in hand, and wrest back what was stolen. Pele isn't just a goddess, she's the living heartbeat of Hawaii, a spirit as restless as the lava that birthed the islands. Her legends trace a path across the archipelago like a fiery fingerprint, from Kauai to Maui and finally to Kilauea, where she's said to dwell in the molten heart of Haileyumaru crater. But this isn't just poetic wandering. Each of Pele's mythic relocations mirrors the geological reality of the Hawaiian hotspot, the underground plume of magma that built the islands one after another as the Pacific Plate drifted northwest. Every new island in the chain, from the oldest weathered peaks of Kauai to the still-growing slopes of the Big Island, carries the echo of her footsteps. The myth doesn't just describe creation, it encodes it. Pele's stories are saturated with drama, and for good reason. She isn't a distant deity but a tempestuous force of passion and jealousy, her emotions as volatile as the eruptions she commands. Take her rivalry with her sister Namakekahai, the goddess of the ocean. Their battles, Pele's lava flows met by Namaka's crushing waves, aren't just family feuds. They're allegories for the very real clash between volcanic land building and coastal erosion, a dance of creation and destruction that shaped Hawaii's shorelines for millennia. When Pele's lava meets the sea, it's more than spectacle. It's the myth playing out in real time, steam hissing like the sisters' eternal argument. Yet Pele's fury isn't senseless. Her eruptions, though devastating, are also acts of renewal. The hardened lava fields, barren at first, slowly break down into some of the most fertile soil on Earth. The myth reflects this duality. Pele destroys forests, but she also gifts the islands with new land. Farmers near Kilauea know this better than anyone. They've watched their orchards vanish under lava, only to return years later to plant in soil richer than before. The goddess's violence isn't random, it's cyclical, a reminder that destruction and fertility are two sides of the same trowel. What makes Pele's lore so enduring is its intimacy. Unlike distant gods on mountaintops, she walks among humans, often disguised as an elderly woman or a beautiful stranger. Countless stories tell of her testing the hospitality of locals. Those who offer her food or shelter are rewarded, while the selfish face her wrath. These tales aren't just morality plays, they're survival lessons. In a land where eruptions can strike without warning, kindness to strangers might mean the difference between a spared village and a river of fire. The myth binds the community together, teaching vigilance and respect for the unseen forces beneath their feet. Even modern science hasn't dimmed Peel's presence. Geologists might map magma chambers with seismographs, but many still leave offerings at the crater's edge, gin, flowers, or chants to honor her. When Kilauea erupted in 2018, swallowing homes and roads, locals didn't just see a natural disaster. They saw Peel reclaiming what was hers, a reminder that the land was never truly tamed. The myth doesn't compete with science, it complements it, wrapping cold, hard facts in the warmth of story. Peel's greatest lesson isn't about fear, it's about balance. She's not a monster to be defeated, but a force to be reckoned with, as generous as she is terrible. The Hawaiians didn't build temples to imprison her. They built them to acknowledge her, to say, "We know you're here, we respect your power." In a world increasingly divorced from nature's rhythms, that's a wisdom worth remembering. The lava will flow when it flows. The only choice is whether to fight it or learn to live with its fire. Beneath the icy waves of the Norse cosmos, a serpent stirs, a creature so vast it wraps around the entire world, its tail clamped between its teeth like a living Ouroboros. Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, isn't just a monster from Viking bedtime stories. It's a living, slithering metaphor for the forces that shaped Scandinavia's most unforgiving landscapes. Picture the Norse sailors, their longships bobbing on waves that could turn treacherous in an instant, staring into the depths where they believed the serpent lurked. Every unexpected current, every rogue wave might have felt like the twitch of Jörmungandr's coils. But this myth isn't just about fear, it's about observation, an ancient attempt to map the invisible rhythms of the sea. The serpent's circular grip around the earth mirrors the ocean's endless currents, particularly the North Atlantic drift that brought both warmth and storms to Viking homelands. When the myths describe Jörmungandr's body creating tidal surges as it shifts, it's hard not to think of the killer waves that could swamp a longship without warning. Even the serpent's infamous venom, said to poison the skies during Ragnarök, finds a parallel in the acidic haze of underwater volcanic vents, where toxic chemicals seep into the water. The Norse didn't have satellites to track ocean temperatures or seismographs to detect undersea quakes. They had stories that turned the sea's whispers into something tangible, something they could name, and in naming perhaps better understand. Yet Jörmungandr's most chilling role comes at the end of days. During Ragnarök, the serpent releases its tail and rises from the ocean, triggering catastrophic floods. This isn't just poetic doom-mongering. Scandinavia sits on the edge of the Eurasian tectonic plate, where undersea earthquakes have historically spawned tsunamis. The 1755 Lisbon tsunami, though far south, sent waves as far as Norway, proving that even distant quakes could unleash serpent-like fury on northern shores. The myth encodes a brutal truth. The ocean that fed Viking traders could also swallow them whole. By personifying this threat as Jörmungandr, the Norse turned an impersonal force into a narrative they could grapple with, a foe that, though terrifying, played by cosmic rules. What's striking is how the myth balances dread with inevitability. Jörmungandr isn't evil, it's fate. Its final battle with Thor, where both perish, underscores the Norse worldview. Nature isn't something to conquer, but to meet with courage. Even the serpent's circular pose speaks to cyclical time, where endings are also beginnings. Modern scientists might call this plate tectonics or climate cycles, but the Vikings saw it first, the world as a loop, where serpents and men alike play their part before the cycle resets. Today, as we track underwater quakes with buoys and satellites, Jörmungandr's legacy lingers. The myth reminds us that the sea has always been both highway and hazard, a giver of life and taker of it. The Vikings didn't just fear the deep, They respected it enough to weave its dangers into their cosmology, ensuring that every sailor who heard the tale of the world serpent would think twice before underestimating the waves. After all, some monsters aren't figments of imagination. They're the truths we're not yet ready to face without a story to soften the blow. Deep in the red heart of Australia, where the land stretches endlessly under a blistering sun, the Aboriginal peoples tell of a being both creator and destroyer, the rainbow serpent. This isn't just a mythical creature, it's the living pulse of the continent itself, a force that carves rivers with its body and summons storms with its breath. To the uninitiated, it might sound like fantasy, but to those who have walked the desert's edge or waited for monsoon rains that never come, the serpent's tale is something far more profound, an ancient weather report written in the language of legend. Picture the serpent's movements coiling across the land during the wet season, its massive body swelling creeks into rivers, painting the earth with temporary lakes. When it rests, the water retreats, leaving behind cracked clay and thirsty roots. This isn't just imagery, it's a precise allegory for Australia's boom and bust water cycles, where years of drought can vanish overnight in a deluge. The serpent's moods mirror the El Niño and La Niña oscillations that dictate the continent's rainfall, a pattern modern meteorologists only began to unravel in the 20th century. Yet Aboriginal oral traditions, some dating back over 40,000 years, had already mapped these cycles onto the serpent's whims, turning climate into character. But the rainbow serpent's genius lies in its duality. It isn't just a force of nature, it's a cartographer. In Arnhem Land, rock paintings depict the serpent's winding path in patterns that eerily match floodplain maps used by hydrologists today. Some researchers suggest these artworks aren't just symbolic, they're practical guides showing where water flows during wet seasons or where to find hidden springs when the serpent lies dormant. The myths even encode navigation tips. Certain stories describe the serpent's resting places as safe campsites, likely because they correspond to elevated ground untouched by floods. This isn't mythology, it's survival data passed down in a form that couldn't be lost to time or colonial erasure. What's most striking is how the serpent bridges the sacred and the everyday. In some traditions, disturbing its resting spots like digging too deep near waterholes brings punishment, storms, sickness, or drought. On the surface, it's a taboo. Underneath, it's an early conservation law protecting fragile ecosystems from overuse. The serpent's wrath ensures that water sources aren't exploited recklessly, a lesson painfully relevant in an age of aquifer depletion and river mismanagement. The myth doesn't just describe nature's rhythms, it enforces them, wrapping ecological wisdom in a narrative too compelling to ignore. Today, as Australia faces increasingly erratic climate extremes, fires that blacken the sky, floods that erase highways, the rainbow serpent's lessons feel urgent. Scientists study ancient Aboriginal fire practices to prevent modern wildfires. Farmers consult traditional weather lore alongside satellite forecasts. The serpent story, once sung around campfires, now whispers a challenge to the industrialized world. What if the oldest stories hold the newest solutions? After all, when the land itself is the archive, every twist of the serpent's tale is a page waiting to be read. In the swirling chaos of a Mesoamerican storm, where the wind howls like a jaguar and the rain stings like thrown stones, the Maya saw not just weather, they saw Huracan. This wasn't just a god with a name that would later echo in the word hurricane. He was a force of pure motion, a one-legged deity whose very imbalance made the winds spiral and the skies convulse. Unlike other gods who stood firmly on two legs, Huracan's single limb symbolized the instability of storms, the way a hurricane wobbles unpredictably before lashing the land with its fury. But this myth wasn't just poetic imagery. It was a survival manual carved into the collective memory of a civilization that watched its greatest cities crumble under the weight of drought and deluge. The Maya didn't just worship Huracan, they documented his tantrums. In the Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Mayan books, pages are filled with intricate glyphs depicting storms so violent they uproot trees and flatten temples. These aren't generic disasters, they're precise observations of hurricane seasons, cyclical as the calendar itself. The Maya tracked these patterns with the same rigor they applied to planetary movements, because to them, Huracan wasn't random. He was a player in a cosmic balance, his rages as calculable as the phases of Venus. When Spanish conquistadors later recorded the Taino word Huracan, they were borrowing from a myth that had already mapped the rhythm of destruction for centuries. Yet Huracan's legacy isn't just in the storms he commanded. It's in the ruins left behind when the rains didn't come. During the Maya collapse around the 9th century, prolonged droughts parched reservoirs and cracked the plaster of their towering pyramids. To a culture that saw weather as divine will, this wasn't just bad luck, it was Huracan withholding his breath, punishing some unseen failure. Archaeologists have found evidence of desperate rituals, smashed rain jars, sacrificed children buried with jade beads meant to tempt the storms back. The myth became a mirror for societal guilt, a way to explain why the skies had turned to stone. But Huracan wasn't solely a bringer of punishment. In the Popol Vuh, the Kayich Maya creation epic, he's also a sculptor of worlds. His storms cleanse the earth before the first humans are molded from corn, blurring the line between destroyer and creator. This duality mirrors the ecological reality of hurricanes, which can strip forests bare yet also spread seeds, replenish aquifers, and flush stagnant waters. The Maya understood this balance. Their cities were built with intricate drainage systems to harness Huracan's downpours, turning floods into lifelines. Even his one-legged stance carries wisdom, a reminder that stability is an illusion in a world where the winds can change direction in an instant. Today, as climate scientists study the link between warming oceans and stronger hurricanes, Huracan's myth feels unnervingly prescient. Modern meteorologists might name storms alphabetically, but the Maya named them after a god who demanded respect. His lessons linger in the thatched roofs of coastal villages, angled to let hurricane winds slip harmlessly over them, and in the quiet dread of hurricane season, when the air grows heavy with the scent of salt and ozone. The myth doesn't just describe the storm, it prepares you for it, teaching that some forces can't be controlled, only survived. And sometimes, the most ancient stories are the ones that still blow hardest against our fragile walls. In the heart of Slavic folklore, where the earth meets the sky in an endless tug of war, two gods wage an eternal battle that shapes the very rhythm of life. Veles, the serpentine lord of the underworld, slithers through the roots of the world tree, his scales glistening with the damp of hidden springs and fertile soil. Above him, Perun, the thunder god, rides his chariot across the heavens, his axe sparking with lightning. Their conflict isn't just myth, it's a celestial dance between drought and deluge, a story woven into the fabric of every storm cloud that darkens the Slavic plains. When Veles steals Perun's cattle, those drifting, rain-laden clouds, the sky doesn't just grow empty, it turns furious. Perun's response is swift and violent. Lightning splits the air like an axe through wood, thunder shaking the ground as he hunts the serpent through the realms. To the ancient Slavs, this wasn't just a colorful tale, it was an explanation for the seasonal shifts that dictated their survival, the stolen clouds. Those were the dry spells that withered crops when the earth cracked under the weight of a rainless sky. Perun's lightning strikes the moment the storms finally broke, releasing life-giving water onto parched fields. The myth doesn't just describe weather, it dramatizes the relief of the first raindrops after weeks of thirst. But Veles isn't a villain. He's a necessary shadow, a god of Earth's depths and the hidden waters that nourish roots unseen. His theft of the clouds isn't pure malice, it's part of a cycle. Without dry spells, the soil wouldn't ache for rain. Without Perun's retaliation, the land wouldn't know the joy of renewal. The Slavs understood this balance intimately. Their rituals often involved offerings to both gods, silver for Perun to bring storms, and honeyed bread left in caves for Veles, ensuring the earth's hidden fertility wouldn't abandon them. This duality mirrors the agricultural reality of Eastern Europe, where too much rain could drown seeds and too little could starve them. The genius of this myth lies in its specificity. The battles between Perun and Veles weren't random. They followed the liturgical calendar, peaking at midsummer and midwinter. Cupola Night, a festival celebrating the summer solstice, often featured effigies of Veles burned or drowned in rivers, symbolizing the triumph of rain over drought. Yet even in defeat, the serpent wasn't destroyed, just banished, waiting to rise again. This mirrored the cyclical nature of Slavic farming, where every harvest was followed by fallow periods, every winter by the inevitable return of spring. The gods' clashes weren't chaos, they were clockwork. Modern meteorology might map these patterns with satellites and algorithms, but the old stories still resonate. When a sudden summer storm breaks over the Carpathian Mountains, it's hard not to picture Perun's axe flashing. When a drought lingers, Veles's coils feel palpable beneath the soil. The myth endures because it captures a truth deeper than science. That conflict isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's the tension that keeps the world turning, the argument between cloud and lightning that makes the crops grow. And sometimes the oldest battles are the ones that still feed us. Every night, as the sun god Ra's golden bark dips below the horizon, the greatest battle in Egyptian mythology begins, not in the world of men, but in the shadowy depths of the Duat, the underworld. Here, Ra faces his eternal nemesis, Apep, the colossal serpent of chaos, a creature so vast his coils could crush the cosmos. Their struggle isn't just divine drama. It's a celestial allegory for Egypt's most existential fear, the moment the Nile might fail, leaving the kingdom to wither under the desert's unblinking gaze. Apep's very essence is antithesis. Where Ra brings light, Apep swallows it. Where Ra sustains life, Apep exhales barrenness. The myths describe him as a being of non-creation, a void given form. But this isn't just poetic abstraction. The serpent's characteristics mirror the brutal realities of the Sahara's advance. Each year, the desert threatened to reclaim the thin ribbon of fertile land along the Nile, its sands creeping like Apep's slithering body. When drought struck and the river's annual flood faltered, it wasn't just a bad harvest, it was the serpent's venom seeping into the world, poisoning the balance between order Mat and chaos Isfet. The nightly battle follows a chillingly precise rhythm. Ra, armed with spears of sunlight and aided by a retinue of gods, fights Apep in the darkest hour before dawn. Some versions even describe the serpent swallowing Ra whole, plunging the world into temporary night until the god cuts his way free. This imagery finds eerie parallels in natural phenomena. Solar eclipses, when the moon obscures the sun, may have inspired the swallowing myth. The cutting free could symbolize the moment totality passes, light flooding back as Ra triumphs. But the deeper metaphor lies in the Nile's own cycles. The river's floodwaters arriving predictably each year were Ra's victory made manifest, a delayed or weak flood. That was Apep's coils tightening, his chaos threatening to strangle the land. Yet Apep's power wasn't absolute. The Egyptians didn't just fear him, they ritualized his defeat. Priests conducted daily ceremonies, burning wax effigies of the serpent and reciting spells from the Book of Overthrowing Apep. These weren't empty gestures. They were psychological armor against the unpredictability of nature. By symbolically destroying Apep every morning, they reaffirmed Ra's, and by extension, Egypt's resilience. The rituals even included spitting on the effigy, a visceral rejection of chaos that turned myth into communal therapy. What makes this myth so enduring is its honesty. Unlike other serpent myths where the creature is slain once and for all, Apep can never be fully destroyed. He's a perpetual adversary, rising anew each night. This wasn't pessimism, it was realism. The Egyptians knew the desert would never retreat, the Nile's floods would always fluctuate, and chaos lurked at the edges of every ordered society. The myth didn't promise safety, it promised vigilance. Modern Egypt still grapples with Apep's legacy. The Aswan High Dam tames the Nile's floods, but downstream soil salinity rises like the serpent's venom. The desert, held at bay for millennia, now encroaches as climate shifts alter rainfall patterns. The old battles haven't ended, they've just changed forms. Ra's bark still sails, but now it's powered by solar panels glinting in the same sun that once armed him against the dark. Apep's lesson isn't about defeating chaos. It's about learning to sail through it, knowing the serpent will always rise, but so too will the sun. The Egyptians didn't just tell this story to explain the night. They told it to prepare for the dawn. What do you do when the sky falls or the sea rises with no warning? You tell a story. Across continents and centuries, these 23 myths reveal something profound about humanity. We don't just endure disasters, we reinterpret them. We turn floods into divine judgments, volcanic eruptions into battles between gods, and hurricanes into stolen clouds. These stories weren't mere entertainment. They were survival tools, psychological armor, and the first attempts at science, ways to make sense of a world that could shatter lives in an instant. Think about what these myths accomplished. Without satellites or seismographs, ancient cultures preserved vital knowledge through allegory. The Maori hero Tāwhaki climbing the heavens to unleash a flood wasn't just a tale of vengeance, it was a record of tsunamis passed down in a form unforgettable. The Norse Jörmungandr coiled beneath the ocean wasn't just a monster, it was a warning about the sea's unpredictability, a lesson etched into the very bones of Viking seafarers. Even the Aztec belief in 5 doomed suns wasn't just fatalism, it was an acute awareness of cyclical catastrophe, a reminder that civilizations rise and fall like waves. What's remarkable isn't just the consistency of these patterns, but their adaptability. The same flood myth takes different shapes in Mesopotamia, Greece, and Polynesia, each version tailored to local landscapes and fears. The Egyptians didn't fear typhoons, but they did fear the Nile failing, so their chaos serpent Apep embodied drought and desert winds. The Inuit, surrounded by ice, wove their climate anxieties into the tale of Sedna, who withheld sea creatures when disrespected. These stories weren't one-size-fits-all. They were hyperlocal survival guides, fine-tuned over generations. Yet beneath the diversity lies a universal truth. Disaster myths aren't about the past. They're about the future. By transforming trauma into narrative, our ancestors did something extraordinary. They gave their descendants a way to recognize danger before it struck. When the ground shakes like typhon stirring under Etna, or the rains vanish as if Huracan has turned his back, these old stories whisper, pay attention. You've seen this before. So here's the real question: what myths are we creating today? When future civilizations look back at our hurricanes, wildfires, and pandemics, how will they interpret our stories? Will they see allegories as sharp as Sedna's hunger or Peel's lava? Or will they find us silent, having traded the power of myth for the illusion of control? The lesson of these 23 myths isn't just about understanding the past. It's about reclaiming a way of seeing, one where nature isn't an enemy to conquer, but a voice to decipher. Every flood, every storm, every trembling mountain has a story to tell. And if we listen closely, we might just hear the wisdom hidden in the chaos. Now it's your turn. Which of these myths spoke to you? Was it the resilience of the phoenix rising from ashes, the cunning of Tsunami outsmarting the 8-headed river serpent, or the quiet terror of Apep waiting in the dark? Drop your thoughts below, and remember, the best stories are the ones we keep alive by sharing them. Don't forget to subscribe for more journeys into the hidden heart of history. Until next time, keep questioning, keep wondering, and most of all, keep telling the tales that matter. Because somewhere out there, the next great myth is already